Great. Welcome to everyone. I think we're getting a lot of people calling in, joining. So I'll kick off immediately. We created this series to just to recap for everyone's benefit as a way to connect or to facilitate further connection between the evolving Pakistani entrepreneurship ecosystem and similar parallels in other growth markets around the world. And it's turned into a really interesting exercise and something I think quite powerful for the Pakistani entrepreneurship community, founders and investors and other ecosystem players, in terms of drawing the parallels between what's happening in Pakistan and in many cases, countries who are either at a similar stage or evolving potentially in a Pakistani pattern or have been there, 10 years before, and have been through that cycle of learning and evolution. So a very, powerful way to contextualize Pakistan with some really similar and distinctly different markets. So we started off in Bangladesh, and then we've covered Saudi Arabia, and we've covered Turkey, and we've covered Egypt. And today I've got the great pleasure to have a number of distinguished people talking about the Indonesian ecosystem, and we'll obviously be drawing parallels in Pakistan. So Indonesia, for those, obviously everybody's familiar from a geographic perspective, but is a substantial market, both in terms of a domestic captive market of a population of somewhere around 300 million people, and a top 5 global economy now or imminently. So the evolution of the Indonesian ecosystem within tech has been very, very interesting for observers like myself. I was fortunate enough to go there for the first time, I think probably in about 2014 or 2015, and saw pretty much kind of day 2, the evolution of players like Lazada expanding into Indonesian operations, Bukalapak as an e-commerce marketplace player evolving and subsequently listing, Tokopedia, and obviously we've seen the evolution of the Tokopedia business and the tremendous success that William and Patrick have had with the pan-regional consolidation of that business into something even bigger. And many other players, Ticket and so forth. So, what strikes you about Indonesia is, number one, solving various problems, if you like, within the e-commerce and marketplace enablement space through the evolution of logistics in a very, very geographically fragmented place. So the emergence of significant capital as part of the Asian story, which we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years, has been a very exciting one, from China into markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, and so forth. So Indonesia has been a crux in that regard with regards to the size of the captive opportunity, payments, logistics, innovation. And, even now, e-commerce penetration in Indonesia is relatively low compared to the size of traditional retail. So the headroom for growth continues to be significant. So Indonesia has become a linchpin in terms of the Asian thesis around the tech sector. And I think from a population perspective, potentially from a demographic perspective, from a behavioral perspective, from a cultural perspective, I think the parallels with Pakistan are very clear. So I won't waste too much time on data points, because we'll have the participant panel covering where we are with regards to the evolving Indonesian market. What I'd love to cover is also, post and an adjustment of investor behavior. I'd love to see what the implications are for Indonesia in that regard, in terms of what's been happening in the last few months. But I'll kick off with our fantastic panel. I'll kick off with Ayesha Saleem at Lakson Venture Capital in Pakistan, and then we'll go around the table, starting with Eddie. So Ayesha, do you want to kick off, and then we'll pass the mic, as it were, to everybody else on the panel?
Sure, thanks for the intro, always. So I work at Lakson Venture Capital. We're one of the first VCs in Pakistan. We identified the opportunity, started off with a fund, so primarily a local fund. We made a couple of investments across different sectors, and so we've actually seen the ecosystem evolving since that's 2018 to now, which is 2022. You've had COVID coming in, you've had the global, the economic situation going on right now. So we've seen the different, different economic shifts which have happened and how the startup ecosystem has evolved and how it has kind of had to startups have had to face those challenges head on. And we've seen tremendous growth in Pakistan in venture capital itself. When I came in, when we started off in 2018, it was a relative niche. But now you see a lot more talent being attracted towards that ecosystem. You see a lot of people being actively involved. You see a lot of expats moving in. You see the opportunity almost, which was at the cusp initially, kind of just taking off.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ayesha. So do you want to kick off, Eddie? Give us a little bit of context on yourself, and then a bit of context on the Indonesian evolution as you've seen it over the last decade or so.
For our firm, we run Untitled Ventures. We believe it's one of not the only Indonesia-only firm that we exclusively back Indonesian homegrown companies founded by Indonesians. So we don't do Singapore chili crab, Thai pad Thai. We don't do Vietnamese pho. There's one Indonesia beachhead strategy, if you will, for the world. Today, the bulk of our capital is from the United States. Today, we have 35 of the top, call it, funds in the world, or their founding partners invest in us to enter the Indonesian market. So the majority of folks checks into the market, for the most part, are investors in our firm. And then we also act as kind of the digital, transformation strategy for 35 of the top 50 families in Indonesia. And so really helping them, about 3 funds, totaling about $250 million in committed capital. And we run a really concentrated portfolio. So we focus at Series A and Pre-A, but in 6 years, we've only done 25 investments. So it's more like a private equity fund. A lot of our peers do that many investments in 1 quarter. In terms of my personal background, I've been a venture investor for 20 some years, as well as a founder and CEO in Silicon Valley, China, and Taiwan. Some of the earlier investments you guys might be more familiar with. I was one of the earlier investors in PayPal. Same with Palantir, same with Affirm, first round investor. So kind of throughout multiple ecosystems. And with Indonesia, it's been really exciting. I mean, obviously, Arya and Alvin here are a lot more experts here than myself, but I've really enjoyed partnering with my co-founder, Patrick, who's multi-generation Indonesian, and our 7 associates. And what we've seen, at least in our firm, we started circa 2016, 17. I think, back then, I kid you not, there's a grand total of companies, homegrown at least, with a valuation of over 25 million of about 15 companies total. And that's like called a street in San Francisco, a meter in San Francisco. I think by 2019, thanks to everyone's hard work here, I think that became 30 some companies. In 2021, I'd say it's today it's maybe 100 some companies with valuation over 25 million, of which maybe 40% or 40 to 50 have valuation over $100 million. And it's been really exciting just seeing when we started in 2017. I think it's very unclear, who's going to lead your Series A, let alone B, C. Now, if you get the Series D, you had KKR, you had Warburg, but I think in 2019, when we launched our second vehicle, I think A was safe, but B, C was an open question. But I do feel in 2019, 2020, 2021, with global capital as well as the pandemic, you have a full stack of capital today. So yeah, so I think that, the capital risk is in large part kind of been removed. I think the talent, shortage has been much improved. The next generation of founders we're backing out of our 3rd fund, in many cases, aren't necessarily like the Wapastanis you hear about, right? Like the Indus Valley track, where, early on, I would say 92% of the founding teams that, have a valuation over 100 million, of the companies with over valuation of 100 million, 92% of those teams have a founder that's studied in the United States. But that is changing, which is extremely exciting. So we're seeing that next generation of founders, no different than in China post 2007, out of Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. But I just kind of leave it at that, because I definitely want to, let my fellow speakers here, they definitely are more knowledgeable than me in many cases. So let me hand it over to them.
Fantastic intro, Eddie. So I think, a couple of themes emerging. I mean, obviously we'll cover 2022 developments, as we go around the panel. The other thing which is interesting in Indonesia, which I'll just briefly mention, is the role of the large traditional industrial family players. I mean, one of the first things that struck me in going there in 2015 and 2016 was really around families like the Riyadi Group and, with Lippo Group and MTech and Bujaja family with SMDV and Roderick Purwana and so forth. You know, you've got a lot of the big family groups traditional in pulp, or, you know, and paper and printing and those traditional Indonesian industries playing very active roles in asset allocation from their balance sheet into fund investing. So I won't say too much more because obviously you guys know significantly more than me about the nature of that pattern of behavior, because I think it's a very interesting one for Pakistan to gain from, which is how do traditional families play a more active role? And I'm sure Ayesha can cover that as well. But I'll pass over to Adrian. I'm sorry, to Alvin. And Alvin, you know, I know AC Ventures quite well. Adrian Lee is co-founder there, managing partner with a very good friend and former colleague of mine, Pandu Strategy, who's basically been a very significant player in a number of investments in that region, starting with C Group, Garena, and, you know, Bukala Park and various other players. So, you know, you pick up, Alvin, and tell us a little bit about AC and, you know, how you see the Indonesian market in the Asian context right now.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Office. So yeah, I think AC Ventures, we are actually a merged fund from two different funds called Agadi and Convergence. I was actually from the Convergence side starting in 2015. We've always been Indonesia-focused investment firm, although we're not like Indonesian only. And I think we've been focusing a lot in the early stage round, basically seed round, pre-Series A, Series A. And I think for myself, I actually, I've been part of the firm since 2017. So for 5 years right now. And I think before this, I was actually from Citibank doing consumer banking, where I noticed, I witnessed firsthand the various challenges in the financial services in Indonesia, and hence decided to jump into venture capital to find people to solve those problems, basically. So I am Indonesian born and raised, and I think in terms of Indonesian context that I can tell here and share here, I remember growing up, there was a lot of issues just for people in the lower socioeconomic level to upgrade their life in terms of income, because there is lack of access to working capital and everything. But I think these days with the prominent access to technology that we have and we have seen, definitely more and more people are able to improve their livelihood. I think that's one context. If we look back maybe like 10 to 20 years ago, but I think in the past 5 years, definitely, I think one of the key observations, and I think all the panelists here, my fellow Indonesians would agree, that COVID actually sort of like helped to convince a lot of people, a lot of part of our societies to adopt technology. I think if we look back into 2019, a lot of MSMEs were a bit resistant in adopting technology because they were afraid if the technology cannot keep up, cannot be stable, and then like they're depending their livelihood to that particular system, right? But right now, I think COVID definitely pushed them. Technology became the means of survival, and hence I think 2020, 2021, we were seeing a lot of the technology penetrating to the part of the societies that were untouched before. So I would say that also was the reason why a lot of the global capitals started to come into Indonesia, because they are seeing there is this inflection point happening right now in our society. So yeah, I think I'll just stop there for now. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Alvin. I'll pass over to Arya. Arya, do you want to kick off? Give us a little bit of a picture on your fund, and maybe pick up the theme around the evolution of the ecosystem, and what are the key drivers that differentiate Indonesia from other regions or markets you may be familiar with.
Yeah. Thank you, Ove. So just a bit about myself. I started my company in the telecommunication infrastructure back in 2008, and that experience in the telecommunication infrastructure is kind of like my base on why I think in Indonesian ecosystem, the tech ecosystem will thrive in the near future, because I was involved in the building of a lot of the telco towers all over Indonesia back in 2013, where it was building massively everywhere. It's more of coverage rather than profitability for the operators. So that was kind of one of my aha moment, right? Where the internet will penetrate a lot of the remote areas, and they'll have more firepower to invest in, to purchase and everything, right? So back in 2012, I started investing and also kind of like co-founded food delivery company. And then we exit in 2015, sold the company. And then we got lucky because like 3 months after we sold the company, Gojek, as you know, Gojek launched GoFood in Indonesia. So that was like killer for everyone else for food delivery. So back in 2015, we started thinking that, okay, we can do some angel investment here and there, right? But if you don't do it in a more institutionalized way, we cannot add value to our portfolio companies. So starting 2015, 2016, we started investing in a lot of companies, in tech companies, early stage, with ticket size ranging from 50K to 200K, depending on the business. And we started with companies that we understand best, right? Accounting, cloud payroll, software, basically it's SaaS, and then also managing as a monitoring, dashboard monitoring. So things that really simple, right? But back then you don't have any solution, like cloud accounting. When I started my company, I had to spend 2,000 Sing dollars, $2,000, just name it, just to buy the software. So when Journal back in 2015 came up, and as a company, as a SME, you don't have to spend that much. You can pay like $20 a month, right, just to subscribe for the cloud accounting. That was like easy for me, because the pain is there. So throughout the years, our investment thesis has changed a lot. We're not just investing money, but also through our network, we can help the companies through the next round. We can shape their stories. We can help find what's the unique economics that matter to the next round investor. So yeah, our strategy right now is to find companies that have problems, or even in the business itself is not attractive enough, and then we transform those companies to be more attractive for the VC model. That would be, I would say, one of my strategy going forward. But also we invest in here and there for companies that are still early stage until Series A.
Got it, very clear. So just picking up a point there, actually, Ari, in terms of that extremely rapid evolution of the Indonesian ecosystem. We've seen obviously Gojek and players, Tokopedia, creating the GoTo group, and we've seen significant scaling in some of the e-commerce players and marketplace players, and even sectors like obviously financial services, OVO, and so forth, created sometimes even out of the corporates. I mean, what are for you the 2 or 3 key success factors in the very rapid acceleration of the ecosystem in Indonesia?
I would say definitely the smartphone, right? So smartphone adoption is one key factor, right? And then the success of the e-commerce, right? Of trying to penetrate all this, it depends on the internet penetration, right? So these 2 factors, I think one of the key factors that help Indonesia in terms of shaping all the access to the remote areas, to the tier 2, tier 3 cities. Because I don't know if the people here know, yes, the GDP per capita for Indonesia was like 4,000, now it's like 3,900, but it's quite fragmented, right? You have like tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities which ranges from 10K to like probably like only 2K or only 1K, the GDP per capita. But then you have Jakarta, where it's probably like I don't know, 20K, just Jakarta alone. So it's quite fragmented, right? To help internet companies penetrate to the tier 2, tier 3 cities, where it's like the massive market, right? Then you need to have the internet penetration to those cities. So I would say the connectivity in those areas are very important, because like back in 2012, you have SaaS, but then you're targeting SMEs in tier 2 cities, which don't have an internet penetration, then your market just shrink a lot. So I would say those 2 things, I would say that should be pay attention more.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll pass over to Eddie. Eddie, from your perspective, I think, as I said, one of the differentiating factors in Indonesia has been the role of the large family groups as capital providers. And obviously, I don't want to diminish the opportunity and the role played by other sources of capital, including foreign investors, which is a big driver, as well as founders themselves, etc. But in terms of the large groups and how they've contributed to the ecosystem, and what we see in Pakistan, which is historically, substantial concentration of wealth among some of those groups, what's been the unlock in your experience, Eddie, in terms of getting and mobilizing the large groups to put what are significant sums of money into the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, we feel that this ecosystem, we would say it's called, 10 years, right? 2011, yeah. I think even Nadim wasn't full-time on Gojek till circa 2014, 15. We're, fortunate to be one of the first investors in the business because we went to school with the founders, 20 years ago in Boston. But at least what we saw in this process is it's a relatively young ecosystem. In 2017, you got to understand the local stock exchange had a technology weighting of 0%, right? Right, I kid you not, 0%. And it was really second, third generation owners, I think, that were tasked by their mom, dad, aunt, or uncle initially with like, hey, let's try some technology. It could be interesting, right? But I think that, leading up, it'd be a nice to have, right? But I think as Alvin mentioned earlier, I think really it became a must have post COVID, right? Like no option. So I think that really pushed it. But leading up to that, I do think it's second, third generation owners that are CEO or next in line from their mom, dad, aunt, or uncle that maybe had that, some global exposure in Silicon Valley, right? Many of which had that exposure, whether it be in the US, the UK, et cetera, that brought back some of that thinking. So we saw that progress. And along the way, we've seen that accelerated, certainly in our process, call it from, investing, let's say 1450 Gojek till today. We've seen certainly a lot of that develop where second, third generation owners really are driving that, called digitization strategy for each of their respective, diversified conglomerates. What we do feel, it's a country dominated, if you will, really, influenced by 50 to 100 groups, of which, 35 or so are invested in our firm.
Got it, very clear. And a question for you, Alvin, which is, as the ecosystems evolved, and as we've seen that substantial growth that Eddie's alluding to around, 2016, 2017, 18, 19, obviously 2022 is a slightly different or somewhat different backdrop, which varies region by region. I mean, here in the GCC MENA region, we're starting to begin now, I think in the last couple of months, to see a fairly significant correction and effect of kind of US headwinds. And I wanted to know from an Indonesian perspective, a couple of questions. One is, what are you seeing in terms of the speed of, investors moving, dry powder? Yeah. What is happening with regards to follow-on rounds? What is happening with regards to what were quite aggressive valuations in Indonesia, certainly up till 12 months ago, even in areas like e-commerce and marketplace that I looked at early stage, looking at some really interesting businesses, but the valuations, benchmarked even to the GCC MENA region and other regions we invest in as a fund were fairly aggressive. So, what are you seeing in 2022 from the perspective of investor behavior and impact on companies?
For sure. Okay, so I think let me structure the answer this way. I think I'm gonna first answer in the perspective of what I observe in the public market, right? Yeah. And then I think then we can go down to maybe to the sum of the later rounds, and then also then the SIP rounds, right? I think in terms of public market, at least what we've seen is it's been corrected for sure, because we would always be pegging our performance to the United States, right? But I think so far the correction is not as bad as we expected it to be honest. Although we don't know whether the next 6 months, next 12 months, we were going to see further corrections or not. But at least if we just take a look into a few technology companies that are listed recently, I mean, I'm referring to GoTo here, right? Actually, the stock price performance is actually not that bad, right? It's not spectacular, but I think people are hopeful, because the story of Indonesia is actually always been how we can use technology as the backbone of the economy going forward in the next 5 to 10 years or 10 to 15 years, right? It's not just speculatively using technology to just make, I don't know, make insignificant changes. It's going to be very significant for Indonesia. And I think partly also that's because all of the achievements from the GoTo group so far, I don't know, I don't really have an exact data here, But from my personal observation, has always been, I mean, like it's been only contributed by the tier one city, the metro area, whereas if we look into Indonesia, we are an island country, and hence maybe a logistic a bit tougher to serve for the tier two, tier three cities. But I think that also means the opportunity is still very wide, it's still very massive. So I think that's one thing in terms of in the public market perspective. If we go then to the later round type of things, I think 2021, 2020, definitely we were seeing a lot of overvaluations, right? A lot of the companies raising without demonstrating the necessary fundamentals to basically justify the valuation that they were given. But so I think in the recent years, in the past 6 months, what we're seeing is that valuation has been, there is a valuation correction in the later stage for sure. We've been seeing, even for some instances where a company has received like an offer and then like the valuation got adjusted down. But the good thing is some of the company, I mean, for the companies who basically are well capitalized, they do have a very good fighting chances to basically change the, I mean, like improve their fundamental, improve their revenue, their margin, and everything, right? So I think right now there is a lot of conversations among the investors, among the board members, to essentially shift of focus from just pure growth into to more of like chasing profitability. How can you become a bit positive with the current fundraising round? And then like if we go to the I think in the later stage round, that's where we see the most impact right now. I think if we go to the early stage, right, seed round, pre-series A, one thing to note here, there are like multiple local funds here who just like fundraise, right? So the dry powder is still out there and they need to deploy. I think the velocity of the early stage deals are pretty much still the same, I would say. Although I think the valuation, of course, is not as high as what we saw back in 2020, 2021, because now each of the investors is becoming more prudent in giving valuation. I think that's one. But also I think the founders are also in the awareness that this is not the market that was super bullish like we saw in the last 2 years, right? So I think I would say where we see the most impact right now are more on the later stage rounds, right? And primarily because they were given like high valuations, and then like now they're just trying to justify that by improving their fundamentals. I think that's where the funding landscape is right now. Yeah.
Okay, understood. So just moving on. I mean, I think I had a question actually, which Arya might be able to answer before we move back onto Ayesha's perspectives on all of this. But Arya, from your perspective, with regards to Indonesia and the ASEAN bloc, give us a little bit of a picture, because I think the other key dynamic is, you know, the facilitation of trade opportunities in many of the countries in the ASEAN sub-region. So, you know, give us a picture as to how that's helped Indonesia build, you know, for example, talent and export capabilities in a wider region than just the domestic market.
Yeah, so I think Indonesia itself, right, we are short of talent, right? We have a lot of great companies trying to hire talent, but of course there's a level of quality of talent that we need, right? You cannot just hire just any talent, right? So you've seen like a lot of the unicorns in Indonesia have engineering teams in Vietnam, engineering teams in India, just because of that problem. So if you try to invest in Indonesia, you gotta take a look at the human capital of Indonesia, where it stands at right now. Yes, there are a lot of initiatives trying to help those shortage of talents, but as of today, right now, we need talent from everywhere, from probably even from Pakistan. You know, if you have companies in Pakistan, a great engineering talent, a great engineering company, it might be like a potential acquisition by an Indonesian up and coming unicorn, because like that's what the problem is right now.
Understood. And Eddie, just a question before, again, we move to Ayesha, which is, you know, obviously players like East Ventures have played, I think, an instrumental role, actually, Wilson Quaker and team around the region with regards to very early stage and seed rounds and so on. But from the perspective of early stage, very early angel seed ecosystem players in Indonesia and the role they've played. Give us a little bit of a perspective on, the Y Combinator equivalent players in Indonesia and how they've helped drive, accelerated value creation early.
Yeah, well, certainly, there's been quite a number of Y Combinator companies out of Indonesia now. It's almost as like every batch is like 10, and in many cases they're competing businesses, which I think is quite overboard. So certainly YC, I think, continues having quite a legacy impact. I mean, we're privileged to be one of the early investors in Zendit, as well as the AC team. So that they were the first Indonesian company, I think, out of Y Combinator. It's been quite a ride. But I would say over time now you're starting to have more, great, incredible angels like folks like, Arya, that we've really been privileged to partner with on many deals. And along with that, you're starting to see many founders too, right? You see the folks out of Kopi Kenangan, you're seeing the folks out of, out of Bukalapak, everyone, starting to invest. So we're starting to have this, angel, super angel, piece that's really exciting. Now, I think if you talk about more about the kind of accelerator piece, we are seeing, these interesting accelerators pop up now, right? I think BRI has one. I think I give credit to the Antler folks. It's not as much of an accelerator, but certainly in terms of more people matching, right? Entrepreneur First, maybe it's not in Indonesia, but it's in historic in Singapore. But Antler now is in market in Indonesia, and then so we're seeing a lot of these accelerators by different conglomerates, et cetera. I think 500 has one. We haven't yet, to be frank, backed any business out of an accelerator today. Not to say I don't believe in it. Just we only done, like I said, only 25 investments in 5 or 6 years. But I think it's really encouraging. I think that Iterative is another great program. I really respect the founders there, and they've done a great job, building out of Singapore. Maybe over time they'll set up shop. But yeah, that's what we've seen, at least for us. But we don't necessarily show up at all the different accelerator events. That's not kind of our approach.
Yeah, understood. So Ayesha, from the perspective of Pakistan and what you're hearing around the really quite dynamic and exciting evolution areas in Indonesia in the last 4 or 5 years, the road of families, the road of early stage angels, super angels, the quality of investors that we're seeing even in this panel by definition, and the quality of founders, the very kind of diaspora, criticality of diaspora, and the nature of the cultural nature of the founders that we've seen historically in Indonesia. What are the parallels for you in Pakistan, and what are you seeing that Pakistan can gain from the Indonesian example?
So definitely Indonesia over the last couple of years has taken off and shown tremendous growth. And I know one of the parallels you generally hear is Pakistan is 6 years behind Indonesia or 7 years behind Indonesia. And that's looking at kind of, the overall statistics amongst the top 5 largest populations. Pakistan's population of 220 million. We have a very young population, average age of 22, 23. 60% is roughly under 30. Increasing digitalization, I think Indonesia got access to 3G, 4G in 2008. We're about 7 years later, we got it in 2014. But due to kind of increasing digitalization and smartphone penetration, we've seen over the last few years, Pakistan finally taking off, because while those numbers are good to have, like you have a large middle class, you have a large population, you can only really tap into it, and the ecosystem can only really take off if they're connected to the internet, right? If they're digitalized. And that's something we've observed over the last few years. We've had a lot more smartphone penetration, cellular subscribers. 3G, 4G data rates have decreased. So about 47% of the rural population has access to, they're connected to the internet. So looking at all of those numbers, it is also justified why in the last 2-3 years, you see that massive takeoff in Pakistan, where in 2018, you had about $24-25 million of VC funding. In 2019, we saw about 49-50 million. And 2020 was a turning point with 66 million. 2021, we saw close to about 350. And it's in the first half of 2022, we've seen about $250 million. So you've seen that kind of taking off. But I think one thing which is very interesting, which Eddie mentioned, was the role of family offices and local money investing in the Indonesian startups. And that's an opportunity which we see is very, very important, and a trend which needs to take off in Pakistan. Because a lot of the funding rounds over the last 2 years, which have happened, have been by larger VCs internationally. You've had some really large, really interesting VCs coming in with like Kleiner Perkins, Tiger Global, MSA, Pioneer, Shuruk, all of these international VCs. Some of them have made one-off investments, some of them have made multiple investments, and you've had a couple who've been active for the last 4 or 5 years, like VNV, etc. So while it's interesting and it's great to have that foreign funding, the experience, the expertise they bring is very, very important. What is even more important, in my opinion, is having access to local money. Because in conditions such as these, where foreign investors are kind of hesitant to put in money in Pakistan, the only people who can truly identify the opportunity is the local individual, right? They know what is on the ground, they know what is really needed, and if the startup in question actually works. And the expertise they bring with them is not something which all international VCs can bring in. The time they can devote, the on-ground expertise, the connections they can make. So that is something which is very important. So just like you always say that having a right group of investors is more important than just getting the money. In context of Pakistan, having local investors, kind of enabling them to invest is very important. You've seen some form of concentration of wealth where you have some larger families, larger family offices, which do hold a significant part of the wealth, just like it is globally. And you see some of them have kind of, over the last few years, have launched a fund or an investment arm. And generations, with their investment arm for their business, they have started looking into startups, which is a positive sign. But there needs to be more. There needs to be a lot more to encourage local investments in Pakistan, so that where the foreign investments kind of fall and there's a gap, the local investors can come up and keep the ecosystem going. Right? You need to continue fueling the growth. So that is something I think is very important.
Understood. Fantastic. So just picking up on some of Ayesha's points, an open question really to any of the panel, Indonesia focused, but from a regulatory perspective, give us a little bit of a picture as to how government has played a role, number one. Number two, facilitation of ease of foreign capital entry, ease of exit, from a tax perspective, from various other reliefs and other concessions governments have made in Indonesia. Give us a picture as to how the public sector and the government have played a role to facilitate the ecosystem.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. I mean, I like what Ayesha mentioned a little bit about how local players can help the startups better sometimes, right? Because a lot of the foreign investors, when they come in, they don't know the real economy, right? The real behavior of Indonesian market. So sometimes, like, a lot of the investment came in and then it's like overinflated the valuation and everything. So I would say I'll just point out what I like about what Ayesha mentioned earlier about the role of the government. It's very great so far for Indonesia, especially for the fintech, right? Because they built the fintech association, and also for the OJK. OJK is like the, how do you call it, like a government body that kind of regulates the fintech. They create like sandbox regulation, where as a regulator, of course, they don't understand the technology and everything, right? But they kind of like give a sandbox for companies to test out and everything, but then they have to defend their technology, what they built as technology-wise, how secure it is, and they can roll it out with what they have so far. So definitely, if you have a government that is supportive in terms of giving some relaxation in terms of the regulation, then it's going to be helpful for the startups to thrive. But if you have a government that is very strict, very old mindset, then as a startup, you cannot evolve. The industry cannot evolve as well. That's my view.
Yeah. So just moving on, actually, I mean, there are so many topics coming to mind, and I'll pass it actually to Eddie to start, which is, from the perspective of success, and you've seen the emergence of, very scaled Indonesian players. I mean, we've mentioned some of them: Tokopedia, Bukalapak, Ticket, Gojek, obviously. What are the characteristics of founders that you've seen as common success traits? Because the thing that strikes me is, a highly entrepreneurial society. We talked about large, family groups who've been historically very successful and scaled both in Indonesia and in the region. A lot of that capital has gone abroad and been invested in wider Asian markets as well as internationally. What makes the Indonesian founder able to scale so big, so relatively quick, above and beyond the market and the TAM, in an Indonesian founder, which is a kind of a DNA insight around behavior, and what do you see as traits which make them so successul?
Well, I would say, obviously Arya and Alvin might be better positioned to given that they've spent a lot more time in market than myself. But at least in my personal experience, I feel, I think folks just naturally are pretty entrepreneurial in nature. They have a couple, quite a number of side hustles and this, that. So we found that folks that are both hyper local and at least early in the ecosystem, no different than what we saw in Taiwan, Korea, and Israel in the 80s, heavily driven by returnees. If you look in the early ecosystem of China from 2000 to 2007, I would say the Indonesian context, certainly if you look the first 40 or 50 companies, 92% of those companies have founding teams that have some exposure abroad. So I do think that was what we saw a little bit earlier. People that grew up in the market really understand the local norms, but also get some global exposure because some proof points. So that's something to look to. So today, I would argue that you don't necessarily, a lot of folks are just homegrown because there's a lot of local heroes that have done it. And so I think that humble, hungry, entrepreneurial, in terms of what it takes, I think early stage really to win, we feel that the three most critical aspects, I think, are commercial strategy. So that's really knowing how to navigate across these kind of core, if you will, family-owned conglomerates, and really working quite nicely and playing nicely with folks, not choosing, let's say, Alibaba or Tencent at Series A, you know what I mean? Hence the role of an independent fund like ourselves. So I think that piece, really understanding how to work hand in hand with the regulators. So many of our businesses work very closely, as Arya mentioned, with Ojeka, for example, on the financial, on the lending side, and also in the crypto space, certainly working closely with the regulator in that space, right? And then also, I think it's very critical to inspire people to join you in your mission, your dream. I mean, it's still a relatively new ecosystem where early on in the ecosystem, often, if one were to hire somebody, a talented individual, their parents might say, why don't you go be a banker, a lawyer, a doctor, or something, right? So I think you got to be able to convince people to come and join you in your mission. So I think HR and recruiting is really critical in that founder. And the last piece, I think, but not least, at least early on the ecosystem, I think, is being able to sell that dream and get the capital to come with you. Now, of course, if your business works, the capital will come chase you, thereafter. But early on, I think these are three attributes that we see in the best founders. And also, I think that we like to tease out the fake founders. We really like those founders that have some view that is not commonly held. So it's probably not what you read in Google Tomasic report. By the time you read it, it's too late. So we love those founders that are really comfortable taking a view that never went back to Elon SpaceX after 4 failed launches, 15 years ago. People either thought he was mentally ill or, he's onto something, right? Same thing way back, Jess Atoya over at Bintu. We met him at Bitcoin 6,000. It went down to 3,000. But at that point, it was just down to one founder. And I think that resolve gave us the conviction to go in. And I think through that model, you can tease out the fake founders. So I think that's what we found. We've really found the best founders to be those ones that really operate in non-consensus businesses, particularly in early stage, that they're almost unfundable by other VCs.
Yeah, fantastic insights. I mean, I think the thing that struck me in interaction with Indonesian founders also is, the word humble is important, and it is important from behavioral context because, you get people who are, in my experience, structured, rational, just don't, in a sense, almost slightly introvert. I mean, they're not blow the own trumpet, possibly Silicon Valley style. Some of the things we've kind of digested in the MENA region, a little bit in the GCC, big talk. There's none of that. You tend to feel you're talking to somebody who's, fortunate, privileged to be where they are, knows how to build teams, has not got too carried away by themselves. And I do want to flag that because I just find that characteristic very appealing whenever I go to Jakarta, and even, you meet the big guys, and it's just like talking to a friend. It's not a kind of egotistical environment, which is great. Passing over to Alvin. Alvin, from your perspective, there's obviously a fairly significant corridor in terms of SoftBank, participating in the Indonesian ecosystem, in terms of China, Tencent and Alibaba and similar players. Tell us a little bit around foreign capital and how that's played a role in the evolution of Indonesian ecosystem behavior.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about foreign capitals, there are. I mean, I don't know. I might be wrong. Eddie and Arya here, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think there are two things that I really see them where they are bringing value, right? I think number one is clearly the amount of capital that they can deploy, which can help to fund some of the. I mean, like if we compare to the capitals versus to the local funds, definitely the foreign ones would still have the bigger amount of money, right? So I think just by being able to fund companies who are already at a later stage, I think that's one of the greater value that the foreign capitals are bringing to the ecosystem. But also, I think the other thing that I really appreciate about the foreign capitals is the fact that some of these investors have invested in the benchmark that a lot of companies in Indonesia are following, right? So I think, for instance, like in the construction materials space, we are seeing a lot of the players in India getting a strong traction, like Infra.market, that where all the B2B is basically, right? And I think with that said, the investors of those companies, when they're coming to Indonesia, there is a lot of learnings, experience that they can channel to the ecosystem here, so that the players who are just starting in Indonesia can avoid doing the same mistake of what they've seen before in the comparables in India. So I think those two are the main things that we are seeing being super valuable coming from the foreign capital players.
Fantastic. And just picking up on that point, you might as well continue, Alvin, from the perspective of Indonesian companies looking to export, and reach the wider ASEAN region and even wider. What do you see as the success of Indonesian players in terms of being able to build export capabilities, for example, in e-commerce or wider? What are the big learnings and successes?
Well, I think, honestly, I may not have a good answer to that, because I think if we look into the companies in Indonesia, the giants ones are typically, they're still mainly operating in Indonesia, right? Doing business in Indonesia. But I think some of the success factors, if you for some of the companies who have successfully done expansion outside Indonesia, that would be like first is engaging the right stakeholders, meaning like having the right partner to the when you're trying to expand to the other geographical locations, I would say. Yeah.
Understood. So a quick question for you, Arya, from the perspective of things blowing up, which inevitably happens in the early stages of an ecosystem where a potentially visible player will go down or will have challenges around just not being able to hit scale, valuation, exit, etc. What are the learnings from inverted commas failure, and how have Indonesian investors coped with that?
This is a tough question, to be honest, because like for early stage, I would say it's more of an art rather than science, because you're dealing with people, right? You're still dealing with a small team. You need to believe in the founder. You need to believe that the founder can execute things. It's not a company where, if let's say next week the founder leaves, we can replace the founder. It's not that type of company, right? So you really need to believe that the founder is in it for the long term, and really have that knowledge, capability, experience to navigate things when things go south, right? So it's really I would say this is like really an art to try to find companies, to try to find founders who can execute big things. And just similar to what Eddie mentioned, right? How a lot of the successful companies are built by founders who already have experience in the global market, abroad, and everything, right? I don't think it's because of that experience abroad. It's just like when you're abroad, you have that open-minded mindset, right? It's not really in your own society where it's very just like just follow the status quo and everything. Where when you're abroad, you're open to those kind of experience where okay, maybe the status quo is not the best solution so far. Maybe we can do other things. Maybe you can do maybe more complex or maybe different simpler things that can solve the problem. So I wouldn't say that you have to be a foreign educated founder to be successful in Indonesia, because like you'll find some open-minded and very aggressive founders from Indonesia as well. So I would say it's more of the finding those founders who have those skill sets and who have those open-minded kind of way of approaching things, because things will not go your way, right? All your plan in your deck will not happen. So what will you do? How can you navigate things when it's not according to your plan? So that's how I discuss things with the founders, is more on the if you do like SWOT analysis, yeah, on the deck you'll talk about your strengths, your opportunities, but rather it's very often that you don't find those threats, those weaknesses, right? So when I meet those founders, that's what I want to dig from them. What is your weaknesses? What is your threat? Oftentimes they don't even think about those things, right? If you don't know what's going to be your threat when you go into the market, then you're going to fail. When you hit something, you're just going to give up. And that's what we don't want to happen. When things go south, you need to find ways to solve your problems. We don't want founders who just give up when they just hit the wall.
Yeah, fantastic. Picking up just a quick one for you, Alvin, which is, from a diversity perspective, and I'm talking specifically about the emergence of women founders, women executives in PE/VC funds. I think there's a fair degree of diversity. I see that in Indonesian funds, but from a founder perspective, what are you seeing in terms of any growth, improvement, opportunity for women founders in Indonesia?
Okay, so I think definitely there are more and more women founders, and we're actually also quite excited to back more of the women founders these days. I think in our portfolio right now, at least some of them have like C-levels who are majority are women actually. So I think it's definitely increasing in terms of the female founders, but I think I don't really have a strong statistic with me right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, understood. So I guess, Eddie, from your perspective around the future, take us a little bit, on a kind of crystal ball type basis as to what you think is likely to happen in Indonesia in the next half year, given the first half of the year, which has been pretty volatile for many of us. How do you see things playing out into 2022 and 2023, especially given COVID over a couple of years and then now market volatility? What's your perspective around how Indonesia evolves?
Yeah, so at least what we've seen, I think I'm not sure what I'm going to share is going to be that novel, but I mean, everyone knows, I think that generally speaking, I think that the market really moves in a pendulum, fear and greed. And certainly, when we started in 2017 to 2020 pre-COVID, it was, definitely on the greed side, it's pretty euphoric. And then, to 2020, not for the same reasons now, but there's a lot more uncertainty that things were really quiet for, call it a quarter or two. And I think we went into fear, but then very quickly, got back in the greed cycle. But I'd say this time around, one positive note is that the world goes through recessions every fund life. I mean, if you're not having a recession during a 8+1+1, something's probably off. But if you're to ask me what we're seeing is, I do think that we're in a fear cycle right now. As many funds, whether it be we were seeing doing call it 10 deals a quarter, or in Q4, Q1, even publicly saying that, but we felt it. Maybe it's just that we're betting on the looking at the wrong deals. We've been pretty steady pace, call it 3 to 5 deals per year through euphoric and downturns, and I think that's still the pace we intend to hold going forward. But we have seen it to be a little bit more quiet, I think, in recent times. And growth, that's not even a question. I mean, we have 35 call it growth funds, or their founding partners invest in us, and most of them are kind of away for the summer, if you will, already, right? Usually even more so than historically, right? And so my sense is that it's going to be very, very quiet until call it Q3 or Q4 on the growth side. It's people have just gone to say, hey, look, we'll come back and we'll be buying stuff on the cheap. So, but I do think that, people are coming back, let's say in September on the growth side. So we'll see, that this US market, things were still pretty choppy. As to early stage, I think Alvin's right. And that, a lot of, ourselves, others raised capital last year. So a lot of folks are sitting on capital and they arguably, are obligated to deploy it within reason. But there is more softness in valuation, I do think, given that a lot of people went pretty heavy, I think, late last year and even into Q1. So if you ask me like what's happening in call Q3, Q4, I think at growth, it'll still be pretty quiet, but people have maybe slid. But I think at early stage, it'll continue being just, kind of status quo, if not improve a little bit, because people will be back from the summer. So at early stage, I think there'll always be, new companies. There's new founders sprouting out of Goto, out of CE, whatever. So there's a lot, the founder quality definitely has improved quite markedly, which we're really, really bullish about.
Fantastic. I back that optimistic note. Just a question, Ayesha, for you. In terms of what we've learned, I mean, I guess the point is, how do we turn this into execution, which is we've got a great picture emerging from many of these geographies, Bangladesh, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Indonesia now, and great inputs. What can we do in Pakistan to facilitate that corridor? What can we do as founders, investors, ecosystem players to kind of build this corridor and to encourage, example, Indonesian founders to look at Pakistani founders from a collaboration perspective or technology outsourcing perspective or acquisition perspective or market development or just knowledge sharing and building a corridor of people visiting each other? What do you think are the key learnings in terms of what we can do to build this into something?
Well, I mean, I guess certain managers, I mean, on our end, we exclusively invest in single country, right? But certain managers cover Southeast Asia or even include Pakistan in their purview. So definitely, information dialogue. I think, certainly I think government, each of the respective stakeholders has played a huge role in this, right? I think government, with the omnibus bill, definitely, deregulating a lot of sectors, removing the negative list is great. I think understanding, accepting from a talent perspective, Indonesia's graduating 200,000 STEM grads a year. China's graduating 4 million, India 3 million on a per capita basis. You're looking at a major delta there, right? So I think that, in terms of the government role, I think that's very critical, both on infrastructure as well. I mean, getting back to earlier when we were talking about that, I mean, both, cell phone tower, what about even roads, just getting goods here and there, right? So I think infrastructure, government policies. In the private sector, I think, it's true. In Indonesia, I think overwhelmingly, the majority of funds are either really anchored by one or two state-owned enterprises or by, one or two families, which I think, can bring more local capital. I mean, we've kind of positioned ourselves more on an independent basis that we as GP, we're the biggest investor in our funds, but I think that's important for local stakeholders to get involved, and those can thereafter be your customers. So I think that's really worked in our case in that we spend a lot of time signing up all the customers before we deploy capital, hence we only do 3 or 4 deals a year. And then I think also, so that covers, I think, the private sector, the public sector, and then, I think founders are really willing to kind of exchange ideas. The best founders spend time with the best founders, and it's really exciting once you get the ecosystem up and running. These founders then start investing in VC funds. I mean, all of our founders, in our companies above a 50 million valuation, all investors in our fund. So, naturally, and they, now are investing in other companies. So I think it's baby steps, and it's every season. So I saw this play out, firsthand in Taiwan, growing up there in Silicon Valley. I certainly saw it covering the Chinese market, and it's just pattern, right? People ask me how did this end up in Indonesia. It's not like it's rocket science. It's just stuff I'd seen, and serendipity brought me to the country along with my co-founder who's been there for 3 generations. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Ayesha, from our perspective, what are the takeouts in terms of, what could Pakistan do tomorrow to facilitate this Indonesian corridor? And I think Eddie talked about the role of government, and I think that's a specific action point for those of us on this call who have the connectivity at the federal level to be able to talk about trade missions and, entrepreneur visits and investor visits between the two countries. Ayesha, what's your learning as to what we can do next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important to kind of facilitate and keep that conversation going between Indonesia and other regional countries where you see the progress taking off. There's a lot of learnings for each ecosystem from each other. So to facilitate travel, to facilitate trade, to facilitate, events such as this one and many other in-person events where you can actually see founders and startups, etc., investors meeting each other. Because a lot of the problem, one area which I see we need to work on is there's not enough awareness, right? So a lot of the challenges Indonesia has faced and are things which Pakistan is struggling with right now. So there's a lot of learning potential and knowledge sharing which can be done to kind of help each of those ecosystems take up and share those opportunities. So I think it's important for the VCs to collaborate together or work together on co-investment opportunities, because a lot of times, even angels in Pakistan, etc., they do not know how to necessarily go about sourcing deals in other countries, even if they're interested in the opportunity, just because they don't know the landscape, and vice versa. So I think it's important on the VC level to kind of facilitate those conversations, make those connections, and then more on a federal government level to encourage trade missions, to encourage events, to encourage the free flow of travel and information to kind of continue building all of these ecosystems.
Fantastic, valuable input, Ayesha. So I wanted to, as we get to the end of the hour, thank everybody for joining. Certainly thank our panelists, thank Eddie, Ayesha, Alvin, Arya, and I hope we can continue this from the perspective of specific action points between our two countries, but also specifically continuing the dialogue around learnings, because as Ayesha pointed out, there's a hell of a lot to gain in Pakistan from the Indonesian example, and there's a lot that can be done, I think, to facilitate using culture, scale, learning, knowledge as a way of building a corridor between the two markets. Very, very critical role that all of us can play. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining. We've had some really good numbers, and the time has been difficult to coordinate insofar as, you know, getting West Coast US and Indonesia on the same time band in terms of comfort for everybody is not simple, but we've had some great attendance and really appreciate everybody's time. So thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for carving out the time to be a panelist and a listener and viewer, and look forward to continuing this geographic corridor series in the next month and future months. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.